Roster movement at Nebraska, big headlines on possible changes to revenue sharing in the transfer portal. How much does it all matter to the Huskers? We're going to tell you next.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started.
All right, welcome in, everybody. Happy Monday. It's Connor Happer here. Mitch Sherman there. The Athletic 1620 The Zone. You guys know the deal. Back from a weekend which featured a few different things, and it's a national championship Monday. We'll talk about Nebraska basketball's latest loss on the road later on in the show as well, and some roster movement, which we're going to dive into. So we have a few different topics to start things off, and we're basically going to tell you how much you should care about these topics or how much they affect Nebraska in the immediate. So let's start with that roster movement. Mitch, give us the rundown on what has occurred with Nebraska's roster recently.
Yeah, so it's been a bit since we've caught up with all of this stuff. So let's just use right now to catch up on everything. Thomas Fidone is heading to the Senior Bowl and to the NFL draft. We knew that about the draft. He made kind of a low-key announcement on social media, and then the news came out about the Senior Bowl. Presumably, he's going to get a combine invite, I would expect, along with Ty Robinson, Nebraska's defensive tackle. Those two would seem at this point to be the most likely Nebraska players to land. Well, I mean, you could perhaps put Nash Hutmaker into that group too. We'll see if he gets a combine invite, but the Senior Bowl is generally a good indicator that you're in pretty good standing as far as the combine goes. So elsewhere, DeShon Singleton coming back to Nebraska. Javin Wright is coming back to Nebraska. We've touched on Javin Wright. The Singleton news was made official on Friday by him on Instagram. He'll be a fifth-year senior. I think he would have made it into an NFL training camp if he had decided to jump. He's young for his grade, still just 21 years old, a couple more weeks until he turns 22. So it's not like he's a big reach for the NFL next year, like a 25-year-old going into the draft or anything like that. Should benefit from a fifth year of college. Javin Wright is a different story. He'll be a seventh-year senior in 2025 and turn 25 in March. But he's had so many injuries and ailments that getting a seventh year, it's really a sixth because that 2020 season doesn't count. This was just a formality. And then finally, Marquise Groves Killebrew was looking forward to the MGK moniker. We have enjoyed your time as a Nebraska football player, but it is sadly over. He took himself out of the portal after committing to Nebraska, seemingly headed back to Arizona, which was his third stop last year in 3 years on the transfer portal train. Also, IGC, Isaiah Garcia Castaneda, who was done at Nebraska because, well, he went through senior day before the Wisconsin game. He's in the portal. He's got another year because of this junior college, whatever it is that extends the careers of players who were in junior college, and he's going to play that year somewhere else. So that was a long-winded explanation of all that's gone on with Nebraska's roster movement in the past week or so. Connor, how important is this? What kind of a grade on a scale of 1 to 5 would you say? How much does this matter to Nebraska football?
Well, I have some questions. First of all, what do you think the conversations are like when a guy's in the transfer portal, he is committed to a new place, and then withdraws from said transfer portal? And how do you think that goes with the coach that he committed to, with the coach that he's going back to school? Like, how do you think that goes?
The more important conversation is, how does it go with Arizona? And I guess we don't know that he's going back to Arizona. Has that been reported? He came out of the portal
If you withdrew from the portal, if you withdraw from the portal, you're out of the portal, right? You're going back.
Yeah, he's not transferring. So I guess he's going to. Well, maybe he is transferring, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. But it depends on how desperate the team is. If Arizona badly needs a corner and they continue to try to recruit Marquise even after he committed to Nebraska, but had yet to sign with Nebraska, they may be in a position where they're happy to take him back. The conversation with Nebraska players who've gone into the portal and then come back out, like Matt Rule says, it's a different set of circumstances for everybody, and it really matters how much you want that player. I think if Emmett Johnson had committed to another school and then had a change of heart, Nebraska probably would have taken him back, much like it did without him committing to another school.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, you just keep recruiting people all the time.
Same with Keona Davis. The two who went into the portal for Nebraska, they were more than happy, and I think they would have felt the same way if they had committed to another school.
I would imagine that Arizona fans are pretty fired up to get like a starter back. Like
sure,
I thought he was gone.
Absolutely, and this kind of stuff happens. Nebraska's had two. This is another one that went the other direction on Nebraska. I would wage a guess that most schools active in the portal, which is essentially everyone, have been on one end of, or both, like Nebraska, of a situation like this here in the 2024-25 cycle.
Yeah. As far as, I think you're probably going to have to, at that position in particular, Marquise Groves-Killebrew's position, defensive back, you're just going to have a lot of people at that spot in spring, and Nebraska's going to have to not have a few of them after spring. So, as we've talked about before in this podcast, he's a good player. Maybe it's not the worst thing in the world that you just lose one before you even go into it. I don't think Nebraska's probably broken up about that one. Singleton and Javin Wright, I think, is important. It's good to have steadying forces back there. Those guys have been pretty solid players when they've been on the field. You always need guys, that you can count on. Nebraska has kind of recruited over them a little bit, but
yes,
it's not bad to have people who have been productive and to have them in the mix, and they're and they're older, like you said, to different degrees, but they're older. And then go ahead. Yeah. Comment on that one.
Well, Wright is such a versatile guy, and there are some other pieces that have been added to the Nebraska defense who are similar to him. And you could say, they've recruited over him, but he can just give you it's not that he plays in so many positions, it's that he can play his position in so many different ways because of his length. And if he can find a way to get a year where he practices all year and is able to take hits in practice and go through full contact, which was not the case last year because of the blood clots that recurred, and he was on blood thinners during the week, and then they would taper his medication. It's a miracle that, amazing. Yeah. A miracle is probably not the right word, but it's amazing that he was able to play on Saturdays in this 2024 season. So if they can find a way to get him back to like 2023 shape, and he's 2 years older, 25 years old, 7th year senior, he can be a huge piece for Nebraska on defense. And Singleton, you know what you have with him. He's a steady player. There were some issues this year, I think, with his tackling or his coverage. Various times you heard gripes about a lot of the guys who were veterans on the Nebraska defense, but he's welcome. He's definitely welcome back, and can be a key piece for that secondary.
Yeah, and the less you have to lean on a guy like that, the better. And Nebraska has definitely brought in some more guys where they can mix them in the rotation. And then as far as Fidone is concerned, I wasn't really planning on him being back. He never said anything that would lead you to believe that was going to happen during the season. It was just sort of a feeling. And then there was rumors about him entering the transfer portal before he finally did a peace emoji on Instagram and didn't really say anything. But then he showed up in the early entrant of the NFL draft. So, and he got an invite to the Senior Bowl, like you said. But it's a guy that I wasn't really planning on being here next year. And if you notice, Nebraska, even though they've lost Nate Borkircher and Thomas Fidone, they haven't necessarily gone and really attacked the transfer portal at that position. So that one doesn't really register a whole lot. All of it together, I mean, there's some relatively significant moves there. Those aren't the biggest moves that Nebraska's had on the roster all season, but I don't know. That's maybe like a 2 or 3 out of 5.
Could they put Thomas Fidone to good use in 2025 if he came back? Yes. Is his loss going to cripple the Nebraska offense? No, because you have Heinrich Harburg moving over there. You have Carter Nelson, who they want to get into that position as a tight end in his second year in the program. You have Mac Markway, who's coming off of a knee injury, the LSU transfer, and then they really like what Luke Lindenmeyer brought late in this season, and there's some young players there, so they're set essentially at tight end without Thomas Fidone, and you know he's maybe one of the guys who's leaving. I put him at the top of the list of players who I'd really like to be able to talk to, just sit down and talk to and hear what he has to say. One, because Thomas doesn't really have the ability to BS. Like he says what he thinks.
Doesn't have much of a filter now.
Yeah, right. And I don't know. I don't know how I would be curious to know how he felt about like maybe some of the criticism that he received when like instances where he didn't seal a block were blown up on social media, or his playing time being cut down after Dana Holgorsen took over was emphasized among fans and media. I wonder where he's at, how he feels about everything, how he feels about the way it ended, not scoring a touchdown in his last year at Nebraska, though he was productive for sure. And you see Matt Rule on Twitter Saturday amplifying Thomas's message and saying how proud he is of Fidone for getting to the Senior Bowl. It seems like they're good with him from inside the program, and I'm sure they are. I know they are. Would like to hear Thomas's take on things.
Yeah, maybe it's just one of those situations where it's best. I mean, Fidone's been at Nebraska for a long time, and he's done. He's been hurt. He's missed a lot of time, and I think he would tell you in that potential conversation that he changed a lot as a person throughout his time in Nebraska.
Matured a ton.
Changed a lot as a program. During his time there. So maybe it's just best we go our separate ways there.
Could be, or maybe he could have benefited from it. I think he's ready. I think he's ready emotionally, physically. It's time for him to give this thing a shot and see if he can stick and be on it and get on an NFL roster and maybe blossom from there. I mean, we maybe talk. I would not be shocked if there's a scenario 5 years down the road where you're talking about Thomas Fidone as a guy who's stuck in the NFL and carved out a niche for himself with some team and made himself a lot of money as a professional football player.
All right. After the break here, we'll touch on a couple of things that might not sound intriguing because we're talking about courts and Title IX and rulings and Big Ten statements and things like that, but infinitely interesting and definitely highly impactful on the world of college football. We'll do that after this.
All right. I am going to tell you about Prize Picks. Is that right? Yeah. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with more than 5 million active users. It is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports because all you do is pick more or less on a 2 to 6 player stat projection, and then you watch your winnings roll in. Right now, you can win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct selections. Prize Picks is the only real money daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy, so you stay and play even if one of your players gets hurt. Here's how it works. You pick a player, you look him up. Maybe you're watching Sunday Night Football. Josh Allen is going up and down the field for the Buffalo Bills. Maybe he gets his team to the AFC Championship game. There's a number out there for his passing yardage or his rushing yardage. You pick more or less. It's that easy. If you win that pick. If you win multiple picks, you win. You sit back and count your winnings. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONCollege on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, back with you on a Monday, January 20th of 2025. We are going to continue talking about some issues that came up in the world of college football and how they impact Nebraska. Connor, on Thursday, the Department of Education ruled that guidelines apply to money distributed by athletes. Title IX guidelines apply to money distributed by athletes to the universities. What does this mean? Well, it means that revenue sharing must be handed out equally to all student athletes, at least according to the guidance that was issued again on Thursday by the United States Department of Education. Nebraska has $20 million that it can distribute to athletes beginning on July 1st. So under this guidance, Dylan Raiola, the quarterback, would get the same share as a golfer or a gymnast. What is your initial reaction to that?
Wild, crazy to think about. I mean, we're doing the impactful scale, right? And we'll explain why we need to probably hold our horses on that here in just a second. But if that is what it is, I mean, that's a 5 out of 5 for the biggest schools in the country. And Nebraska is one of those. Nebraska is going to be one of the schools around the country who is in for the full boat of $20.5 million, and they're in for their NIL, and they're in for the full scholarships wherever they're looking or wherever they decide they need to. Super impactful. Nebraska has almost 900 student athletes, Mitch. Almost 900 student athletes. You're talking about dividing $20.5 million over 900 student athletes. It's like $23,000 a student athlete.
I'm not even sure if they mean that they need to be distributed equal to all student athletes, or if they just need to be distributed equally among male and female student athletes.
But there's
either way
things you could do.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're doing that for the football team, then you're going to have a pretty heavily paid volleyball and women's basketball team and more
track and field and swimming.
The numbers are so big for football. Like it's hard to fudge that if that would be the case.
So what I'll say is we're not against Title IX here at the Locked On Nebraska podcast. It's created opportunities for women that just would not exist in college sports if it weren't for the law of the land, Title IX. But revenue sharing is the sharing of revenue, and college sports under this Department of Education guidance issued last week would be trying to live in two vastly different worlds if this was actually put into place. One world that clings to the ideas from many years ago when amateurism actually applied at football places, football palaces like Ohio State, Notre Dame, Nebraska. And then another world that exists when you look out the window today. It is not amateurism. That even playing field that what was maybe at one time in place is long gone. You really can't try to pretend like it's still there. The NCAA learned that lesson the hard way. So I think this is just a roadblock. It'll be challenged in court, perhaps overturned. If it's not overturned,
I don't really think that we're going to have to deal with this, to be honest with you.
If it's not overturned, then the incoming Department of Education officials in the new administration, the Trump administration, which begins today, are likely to not agree with the guidance that was issued last week. So,
it's fascinating, that's for sure. And that would be a bombshell, just several months before it goes into, rev sharing goes into effect. But like I said, I don't know. We'll see what that looks like.
What would happen? I'll finish with this. What would happen if the scenario like this did exist is that the sports that make the money would ultimately say goodbye to the NCAA, take their TV networks and start fresh. Yeah. And what you would end up with dramatically reduced opportunities for those athletes in the non-revenue sports that this guidance is supposed to protect.
Correct.
So revenue share starts July 1st. I expect that it's going to look like what it was intended to be, the actual sharing of revenue, revenue that's generated by football players, not tennis players.
I saw a number out there, just a general figure that most schools were basically planning on weighing their revenue, their $20.5 million if they're in for the full boat, about 85% to their football and men's basketball teams.
Right.
85%.
Yeah.
And then the rest is the rest, which is still a chunk of the pie, but it ain't.
So 5% is 5% is $1 million. So at Nebraska, if you give your volleyball program, and Nebraska volleyball will receive more than volleyball at almost every other school, that's $1 million for your volleyball program if you afford them 5%. And remember, NIL is still out there. NIL is separate from this. NIL is not subject to NIL that comes from the collective, from a third party, is not subject in any world to this Title IX guidance. So that's not changing. We're talking about the $20 million that's going to be distributed in-house, and there's still some uncertainty about it, but I would expect that your starting quarterback, your starting offensive left tackle is going to get more money than others who are walking around the facilities. So that's like facilities.
That's like a 5 with an asterisk, because I'm not sure what that's going to look like.
I think it'll be a 1 at the end of it for Nebraska. Right. I think it's not going to matter at all.
Should we get to our last topic here, or should we?
Yeah, let's talk about this quickly. Yeah, why don't you introduce this? We'll talk about this quickly.
All right, so you may have just seen the statement on this. The statement eventually came from the Big Ten, but you're wondering, why is there a statement from the Big Ten in conjoinment with the University of Wisconsin? Xavier Lucas said he was going to transfer to Miami, but he was going to do so without ever entering the transfer portal. And Wisconsin,
why not?
Basically said, no, we're not allowing you to enter into the transfer portal because you signed an NIL deal here and you had you have to stay.
That's how they got to this place.
We're not signing your papers to go into the transfer portal. And Xavier Lucas has said, well, I don't care. I'm leaving anyway. And the Big Ten has come out in support of Wisconsin's stance. And obviously Wisconsin is fighting for its own self, and it's claiming that Miami tampered, which I'm certain they did, because he was going to transfer to Miami without entering the transfer portal.
Well, he was never in the portal.
Right.
So any contact that Miami had with him would technically be tampering.
Correct.
Wisconsin says they have conclusive evidence that Miami tampered. Well, yeah, he wants to go play football there. He's certainly had a conversation with the Miami coaches. The craziest part to me about this is that the NCAA responded after Lucas announced his intention to unenroll from Wisconsin and enroll at Miami, and said, that's fine. Nothing in our rules stops you from doing that. So basically, the NCAA just admitted the transfer portal, it doesn't really do anything legally. Yeah. We just have it and hope that people comply.
The NCAA basically said the same thing that they've been saying for the last half a decade now, and even longer after, before that, which is, I don't know, you guys take care of this. You guys handle this. It seems like a Miami, Wisconsin thing. Big Ten, if you want to get involved, great. ACC, whatever, but you guys take care of this. We're going to let you do your thing out there. Thanks.
The NCAA is like, we have tried to fight these battles and they have gone very poorly. So we're just going to step aside and let you all do whatever you want with this deal. This is one, unlike the last topic that we discussed about rev sharing. This is one that I think could have some ramifications down the road. I don't know that the transfer portal is going to just disappear because one player bypassed it and was able to end up at another school. It seems that for a while, at least, athletes are going to want to play by the rules that are in place, but it could start. This could be the first domino. And we could, I think ultimately what we're going to get after rev share is we're going to have contracts, and you're going to have a 1-year contract or maybe a 2-year contract, which is more lucrative. And then there will be then it'll be like pro sports where you can't just up and leave and say, hey, I'm going to break the contract. I mean, that's not legal to break. They've got to have contracts. And I think this situation is only more evidence of why those contracts between schools and athletes are necessary.
Yeah, there needs to be some piece of paper that binds the player to the university. Currently, we don't really. It seems as if we don't have that, and maybe we never had it all along. We just didn't know it. It's now being challenged. Okay,
I'd give this one
this is a high score,
3.5. Yeah, 3.5, 4.
Yeah, mid range, somewhere in there. I'm with you. We'll come back. We'll grade Nebraska basketball skidding at the moment, losers of 4 in a row, and we'll talk about their plight when we return in the Locked On Nebraska podcast. But first, a message from our friends with the FanDuel Sportsbook. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300, and you get to keep the action going. You get to stay in the game. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and there's great variety of bets. You can bet on the conference championship games next weekend. But not only that, I love to take a look at anytime touchdown scores in the individual games. Why not? I mean, you're going to get minus odds on it. You're going to pay a little juice, but odds are that Saquon Barkley is going to score a touchdown in the NFC Championship game next week against the Washington Football Commanders. So maybe you could take a look at that. Bet $5 and once again, get $300 in bonus bets. Head to FanDuel.com today and make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, welcome back. Connor Happer, Mitch Sherman with you, wrapping up the Locked On Nebraska podcast here on this Monday. Nebraska basketball goes on the road to Maryland, out to the East Coast this weekend, yesterday, to be exact, and fights a valiant fight. I guess we can hand them that in another sleepy Big Ten environment, but loses 69-66. They've dropped 4 in a row. They were they were in control against Iowa and lost in overtime. They got blasted by Purdue. Rutgers beat them, I think, fair and square, I guess, as we discussed on the show. And then kind of the same deal with Maryland. Either way you cut it, Mitch, you go from 12-2 to 12-6 in the span of 12 days, and 2-5 in the league, and the outlook looks a little bit different right now.
Yeah, this is problematic.
Our bets, our predictions are in grave danger. Grave danger.
Yeah, they're gonna have to start now and flipping this thing. 4-game losing streak for a team that began that maybe in shape that was just above being on the bubble. They're now on the other side of the bubble where they're sitting. I mean, clearly. And they're going to have to win a couple games that you're not expecting them to win. Now, there are some opportunities at home against teams that are in the top 20, 30 of the RPI. I'm sorry, of the NET. And it's got to.
You put a lot of pressure on yourself, like you said. You're going to play Illinois at home, and that might be one of the best teams, if not the best team in the league. And you now have to win. It's the same thing with Michigan, who comes to town a little bit later. That's one of the top teams in the Big Ten. You now have to win these games.
I'm trying to find the right words for this, like where they're at. Like it's Juwan Gary kind of took his teammates to task after the loss at home to Rutgers about being tougher and being more focused. And then he went out and committed a bunch of turnovers at the beginning of the game against Maryland when Nebraska got behind. Like it was a winnable game that Nebraska played on Sunday at Maryland. I didn't feel like Maryland played all that well. In fact, watching that game after having watched the Rutgers game in Lincoln a few days before, I give Rutgers all the credit in the world. Like its 2 freshmen were studs that night. Maryland, to me, was just kind of there for the taking. And in part, Maryland allowed Nebraska to get back in the game at the end. Maryland had a 10-0 run to extend its lead, I think, up to 8. And then Nebraska went on a 9-0 run to tie it at 66. Maryland hits a three to take the lead, and Nebraska in the final 15 seconds just couldn't get anything going offensively. Connor Segan ends up throwing up a shot at the end that wasn't a good look. It's just not there. Like, things just aren't clicking for them in this moment, and I feel like it really just started in the last 15 minutes against Iowa a couple of weeks ago. Once that thing hit, like, they were flying high before that, coming off the UCLA win. They went into Iowa, played really well for 25 minutes, and then the last 15, the bottom kind of fell out, and they haven't been able to recover.
It definitely felt like they let that Iowa loss maybe beat them twice. They didn't even show up against Purdue, and that
4 times.
That was the disheartening week out of this thing. I mean, you could live with the way you played against Rutgers, and you view what happened against Maryland on the road on Sunday as a missed opportunity, simply because you had them on the ropes and it was a road game, and that could have stabled out your ground a little bit. But now your foundation is cracking a little bit. So, I always like to view it in segments, right? You got 20 Big Ten games. Through 7, Nebraska's 2-5. That's difficult. That's toward the bottom of that mushy middle where, however many teams are going to make the NCAA tournament. I don't think Nebraska, I'm not in full on panic mode with them right now. I'm not thinking that they're in danger of missing the Big Ten tournament. I don't think they're going to finish at the bottom of the league. It's a pretty solid team, and I like the pieces that they have, but you got to catch yourself from, you got to get out of this little tailspin that you're in right now, and you got to do it pretty quick.
Yeah, I'm looking at USC. USC's 3-4 in the league, 11-7.
They've done better lately. I mean, they've done better lately. They beat Iowa and Illinois in back-to-back games. I mean, that road.
That's right. Winning at Illinois was eye-opening.
They did it. Illinois didn't have Yakachonis, for that game, but still, whatever way you cut it, USC's probably thinking, hey, we got a chance to get to 4-4 in the league and make a run at this thing. So
it's a must-win for Nebraska on Wednesday night at PBA because of what comes after it. At Wisconsin on Sunday, and then Illinois coming to Lincoln next Thursday before Nebraska goes to Oregon on Sunday, February 2nd. So the three after USC on Wednesday night are all considerably more difficult on paper than the Trojans coming in. A good team. So this is a must win, or Nebraska's potentially looking at 2-9 in the league, which then you are in panic mode, and then you are worried about making the Big Ten tournament.
Yeah, you're cooked at that point. So you gotta stop and get yourself out of this tailspin as fast as you possibly can. Okay, that's it for us. Ooh, jeez.
Let's quickly make our picks for the national championship game tonight.
Of course, the national championship. It's the national championship.
We need to look this up. The line in this game, the most recent line, 8.5. Thank you for knowing that. I was frantically typing in FanDuel college football.
You could have got it fast because that's how they roll over there.
That is, they do go fast. So I'll just go first since we're running out of time here.
All right.
I've already made my pick on the Athletic. I'm sure it's up somewhere in some published item. We've got a ton of stuff that's out today about this Ohio State Notre Dame game. So go check that out on theathletic.com and the app. I picked Ohio State 27, Notre Dame 17. I think the Buckeyes have too much firepower.
Yeah.
And Notre Dame, while more fundamentally sound, better on special teams, pretty comparable defensively, is not going to be able to hold up for 4 quarters against Ohio State's offensive explosion and offensive fireworks. Ohio State needs to keep Riley Leonard in check on the ground. It's kind of my key for Notre Dame's success, is if Riley Leonard can get loose. I think that Ohio State is perhaps susceptible defensively to a good QB runner, which it hasn't really seen this year, at least not in a situation where that QB was in a game and in position to run a lot. So Buckeyes by 10, they cover.
Yeah, I just like that. That's what logic is telling me. But I don't know, man. Like my heart is thinking that Notre Dame is going to hang right in there. We saw what happened against Penn State. I mean, they were getting they're getting beat up pretty good in the first quarter of that game. Notre Dame was, and they just hung in there. They got the field goal before half, even with Riley Leonard out. Their backup drove them down the field. And they got a field goal. They got the ball right away and turned into a different team. Like, I don't know. They just hang in there. Like, they're not going to be defeated if they're down 14-0 in the first quarter. I think Ohio State, like that's how they get teams sometimes. They get them to roll over a little bit. And if this game's close late, like Ohio State, they showed it a little bit against Texas. They just get a little wobbly.
Notre Dame does the opposite.
Exactly. I'm not ballsy enough to pick Notre Dame to win this football game, but I am ballsy enough to take them to cover the 8.5 points. Give me 24-20 Ohio State.
Okay. Xavier Watts gets a pick in this game.
Dude,
reps
he's a dude.
The city of Omaha before he goes off to the NFL. That's the last thing I'll say. Any bold prediction for you?
I mean, I could tell you on that one. I could ride with you. Something Xavier Watts related. I don't know. He gets to hold the trophy at the end. He says, "Go Burke Bulldogs."
All right, there you go. Thanks for making the Locked On Nebraska your first listen today. For your second listen, go check out the Locked On Big Ten. Craig puts the Big Ten first. He's talking about Ohio State's bid for a national championship today and everything else that's going on in the Big Ten Conference. You can find that on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts.